let's talk about what I read in basically the month of December. What I finished fiction-wise. I've got 5 books here, roughly in order. I should have a 6th book. No, maybe not. I will just tell you about the other book with the power of my mind. The first book we'll say is Rogue Squadron, the first book of the Rogue Squadron series, or the X-Wing series sometimes. So called by Michael A. Stackpole. This is Star Wars Extended Universe, the old universe, the Legends universe, back when the world was young and innocent. And Rogue Squadron, it's after Return of the Jedi, and Wedge Antilles is getting a crew together, to be an elite squadron in the offensive against the reeling Empire. They've lost the Emperor, but they're still there. It's Essentials Legends collection. It's very much seen as a kind of core series. I remember reading about other Star Wars stuff. I remember in the kind of early noughties on GeoCities kind of sites, there's one that played Fields of, like an instrumental MIDI version of Fields of Gold by Sting in the background for some reason. And that was about Star Wars Extended Universe stuff. And I remember reading about the X-Wing stuff then. Didn't read it at the time. The basic summary here, the plot is they're going to fight the Empire. There's some guys in their squadron. There's some guys we see on the Empire side. Isan Lissard. Is that no? Isard. Lisanne Isard. I think that's her name. Was a senior up in the Imperial Security Bureau. She is in charge in Coruscant. She's taken charge after the fall of the Emperor. And so we meet some other Imperial characters around her, other intelligence agents, other military people. And basically Wedge is getting his crew together, and they're training and they do stuff, and there's kind of tensions between members of the crew. There's the guy who wants his second in command isn't trusted by Alliance military, some of the military high command, because maybe he's a spy. He's not, surely he's not a spy, but there's some fear he might be compromised. It's not clear. Things like that. Tycho is his name. Corran Horn is our kind of fighter pilot lead, really. So we get viewpoints from particularly those people: Wedge, Tycho, Corran, as well as some Empire people. Now, at the level of the sentence, this is a weird thing, a really almost unique experience, not quite unique, but almost unique, of reading a book where at the level of the sentence, Stackpole is kind of a bad writer. What I mean is everything's very flat or very obvious. Sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it's ugly. You're sometimes having what you're meant to think be not just rammed in your face, so you definitely know it, but in the flattest way possible. He wanted to fight the belief that because they're elite pilots, they're above the mundane sort of duties all other pilots had to endure. I mean, that's a Cliff Notes summary of an entire subtly played or subtly written scene. But he's just like, oh, just to be clear, you need to know this, and he puts it in the kind of the most mundane language possible. There's no literary style, and sometimes it gets beyond that into just the sentences being actively confusing or ugly. And yet, it's a pretty good book. That sounds remarkable. It's like, well, how can you even understand it? But at the level of structurally, plot-wise, and in terms of core character stuff, and in terms of what they have to do, by structure and plot, I don't just mean the actual structure and pacing, that works well, but the content is really strong. Stackpole really gets that stuff in a way that lots of much more famous writers do not get. Many people have made, probably Stackpole hopefully has made lots of money from this stuff, but people who have made far more money and have far bigger names don't get how to write books in terms of actually come up with a whole book as well as he does. And it turned out to be quite good fun. I was like, I'd found it a bit kind of slow going at first because of that writing issue. It's all very obvious. It's all really basic. Sometimes it's actually quite ugly. And then, about a quarter of the way through, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, keep going. And about halfway through, I was like, I'll just read the rest of this now. I finished it, the rest of it in one sitting or something. I was very pleasantly surprised. Finn Family Moomintroll, imagine it's here. I think I've put it back in the bookshelf in the kids' room. Is a book in the Moomin series. It's the third one. I read it with my kids. I read the first two with my kids. They've actually heard all of them, though they won't remember all of them. But yeah, in it, it's the Moomins is a really hard concept to quantify in literary terms. It's sort of weird, slightly melancholy, oddball kids books, but they kind of definitely have an emotional valence that hits for the adult too. And mostly, is this one the first two? There's a plot, there's a flood, there's a comet. Here, it's sort of they find this hat at one point that's magic, but then also there's a thing where some of them go camping, and then also they all go and get a boat and go to an island and meet some weird creatures, and then some other people come and move in with them, and then these people are being chased by this other monster, and there's a party. You get the idea, right? It's just a bunch of stuff. Like it's about them having is it the late summer, early autumn of a particular. No, I think it's a whole year. It's spring through to autumn. In fact, it's from waking up from hibernation through to they're about to hibernate. So it's just a year in the life of, and it has a very different feel to the first two because they're much more quest based. And it really, for Tove Jansson, the writer, it really unleashes her ability, I think, to come up with incident and slightly poignant and funny incident with this cast of weird people. Like the Moomins themselves, like weird hippo trolls, and so are the Snorks who live with them. You know, obviously the same species. And then there's other people like Snufkin seems to be like a weird human. There's apparently a Switch game about him. He's like a weird sort of human. Sniff is like a little weasel or rat or something. Thingy and Bob, who knows, really, if we're honest. The muskrat is a muskrat, though he appears to be intelligent. The Hemulan, who knows, he wears like a muumuu. It's weird. It's surrealistic at points, but not quite surrealistic. I don't mean in terms of like nothing makes sense. What I mean is it's surreal. It's above and beyond real. The whole thing sort of has its own logic that you learn to follow. No, it's lovely, funny. The other kids' book we read or finished that month was The Wouldbegoods by E. Nesbit, the second Bastable series book, and so Story of the Treasure Seekers is the first one. We love E. Nesbit. We are big fans. We've read a lot of her together. I enjoy it too. It's hard to separate exactly how much you're enjoying a book you read with your kids from your kids' reaction to it, obviously. But I would still say this is one of the funniest books I read in the year. I think it's, very, very funny. Very, very sweet as well. It's narrated, it has a narrator who's officially just telling the story, but is in fact Oswald Bastable, one of the Bastable kids. The 5 Bastable kids are the main characters. And they get up to all kind of mischief. In the previous one, they're trying to find money and become rich because they knew their mum's died. They didn't have much money. Now they've got a rich uncle, but they get sent away for the summer with a family friend, basically, just to get on with stuff. And they're like, well, because we cause trouble for our relatives, we should try to be good. So they come up with this society of would-be-goods. And they're trying to do good deeds, and it's not really clear they're doing good deeds, or at least when they do good deeds, they go wrong, whatever. It's funny. It has good narrative voice. Like Nesbit is a master, whatever you want to say, of narrative voice. Railway Children is very different to Samiad, which is very different to Bastable. And yes, it might be this series might, and she has some very good short stories too. Might be my favourite set of stories by her. So yes, Wouldbegoods. Faerie Queene book 1 I finished, and this one, what I've been talking about on the Substack. This is a poem. It's different. It won't be for everyone, but it's Arthurian fantasy, basically. Not about Arthur himself. He turns up sometimes, but it's about various knights going out on Arthurian type quests, and Prince Arthur, who's in Faerie as a young man on quests, comes into the stories too. And it's very readable poetry as far as it goes. These things always require some training if you're not used to it, just like if you've never read a novel before. It's readable, fairly open, very beautiful at points, usually just solidly readable and open to the reader, full of action. It has this whole Renaissance allegory thing going on, inverted commas, where I don't mean everything is just one other thing. Okay, well, now we're reading about this. This must mean we're looking for some thing from the period to do with theology or philosophy or politics. Stuff like that comes up, but it's not really about that. Faerie Queene is about the story, and everything else gets built on top of it, and it's massively influential, therefore, for C.S. Lewis. If you're going to look at stuff like, and I'll have a video about this soon, actually, Tolkien, Lewis, and allegory, but about what allegory is in Lewis. Very, very good. Very late book of the year consideration. I realise I actually have a this year book, which I will review, actually. But The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. So this is my penultimate book of this review, my last book of the year that I finished pretty much. And by the way, the whole Faerie Queene is worth reading. But yeah, my reread of book one finished, I think at the start of December, actually. But yeah, The Last Kingdom is the first of what was originally the Last Kingdom series, now normally called the Saxon stories, about Uhtred, son of Uhtred, a Saxon who is raised by Vikings, and so he's a pagan and he's sympathetic with Viking or Danish ways, rather, Norse ways, but is by various means, we find this out, that's not a spoiler, the prologue, essentially the prologic material sets this up. He ends up helping Alfred the Great beat the Danes and reclaim England and unite England for the first time. The Last Kingdom here is Wessex. And this I read with Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads, who we usually have a couple of buddy reads together a year. Go and check his channel out. We both really enjoyed it. I think we both expected it to be solid. Bernard Cornwell's a solid writer. But my recent sharp rereads weren't incredibly exciting. And so I came in a sense, with low expectations and was blown away. It's a very, very good book. It's not a perfect book necessarily, but it's a very, very good book with little to actively complain about. The biggest things, I think, are basically around the way the narrative voice, which is first person, is used in a way that is very subtle and clever. That there's this stuff where Uhtred says this happened, he doesn't comment on it, you're allowed to decide what you think about it. Other times he kind of gives his opinion about something, but you can tell, it's funny, but you can tell that the author, behind the author, I. Cornwell, is leaving it open to you to almost debate this with him. And there's stuff that's ambivalent and ambiguous. A big thing is he loves a lot about Norse, Danish, Viking culture. But he's obviously also finds it very hard to process some of the atrocities he saw them commit. And there's obviously a religious component to that, despite the fact that he is a pagan. So there's a thing where without him saying, I've got a big philosophical discourse on paganism, there's obviously a way in which you're meant to be, as the reader, engaging with it and thinking about what is good and what is bad in his belief system, and what is good and what is bad in the other belief systems you encounter. Most obviously Christianity, but or other things too. The characters are the other big thing. Uhtred himself is great. His dad, also Uhtred, is really actually quite a powerful character. Ragnar is great, and historical characters. There's some priests who are great as well, actually. Father Willibald, for instance. But there's also Alfred the Great and Guthrum. Talked on this channel before, Ballad of the White Horse. Very different perspective on lots of the stuff that happens in this story. This gets up to the battle of, is it Crediton or wherever? Kinwit. Up to the Battle of Kinwit. Yeah, this is his childhood up to the Battle of Kinwit. For those who are interested in historical stuff, there are like another 12 books. I think I've heard a few people say the first 5 or 6 are really good, and then they kind of slow down a bit. I don't know if that's true. Some people like all of them. Obviously, big famous series about them too. Finally, this was what I read with my book group on Discord. This is on the book Discord. Guy Gavriel K, The Lions of Al Rassan. Technically not a standalone in the universe. He has written at least, is it 2 more, the Sarantine books in the same universe? And maybe he wrote something else as well. But yeah. This is set in this fantasy medieval world in the equivalent of fantasy Spain, and it's during the fantasy Reconquista, and particularly it's around a close analogue of Alfonso the Great. Is it Alfonso VI the Great of Castile and Leon, and El Cid, his general. If you know your Age of Empires 2 Age of Kings, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, El Cid and the changes in the rhythm of the Reconquista to do with this, the time at which the Christians really begin surging south, and therefore different sects move across from Africa to support the the Islamic emirate there. And yeah, it's quite long. It's nearly 600 pages, and I enjoyed it. And this is what I said: I enjoyed it, and don't feel like I absolutely need to read another Guy Gavriel K book again soon. I probably will read the Fiona of Our Tapestry this year, but I really enjoyed it. I really liked the characters. I thought his character work was generally very good. I thought his use of history was interesting. We talked about this in the book group, actually, that obviously he is dealing with history differently to how Gene Wolfe deals with history in Latro, which I talked about last time. A big thing is that he is presenting a history that is obviously almost like a pastiche history, very close to the actual history, but not quite, in very important ways different. Everything seems to have an analogue from our world to this world, but he's using that partly to comment on things. It's interesting, for instance, a big thing is that he is dealing with personal conscience versus proto-nationalism versus religion, all these things as inspiration for actions, why you do stuff, basically. And he tries to have a debate about that, really, in the book. So he's using the real history for that, but he's also using it to find characters who then take on their own life on the screen, on the page. They're not just the kind of characters from history anymore, and he does different things with them. And he depicts really interesting places that, where he tries to show different aspects of this medieval world as he conceives it. He tries to deal with the anomalous status of Jews in Spain and elsewhere during that time, historically. It's a very powerful, interesting book. I really enjoyed it. There are some obvious problems. Like there's stuff just like he's massively redundant in his writing style. He regularly just will add in sentences to tell you what you've just read, to tell you how you're meant to feel about what these people are feeling. There's pacing issues. By pacing, I don't really mean like it goes mostly fairly quickly, so I don't mean that kind of pacing problem. I mean pacing in terms of character stuff is that sometimes you get to a character resolution and you're like, oh, okay, I understand I was meant to feel this, but he hasn't developed it sufficiently. He's rushed. He's apparently a bit a pantser. He's writing as he goes, he's planning as he goes, and it may mean that some stuff gets underdeveloped. And finally, the epilogue. This is a minor complaint. You could debate some of the decisions about the actual ending, but the falling action of the epilogue, in fact, technically even the ending is kind of the falling action, but the real falling action of the epilogue seems like an incredibly rushed sequel written into 25 pages, and it's kind of not very good. It's weird. It's not offensive strictly, but it's just obviously redundant, not integral to the plot, and it just tries to tie everything up you've ever imagined. So yeah, it's a guarded recommendation there. I kind of recommend Rogue Squadron more than this, despite the fact this is a better book than Rogue Squadron. Because Rogue Squadron, like, man, do you know what is excellent? There's one thing that very few books are. Here, this has loads of stuff that is great, and also lots of very annoying things about fantasy in general, not just this author. Last Kingdom, Bastable trilogy, Film Family Moomintroll, Faerie Queene. Unreserved recommendations, though obviously Faerie Queene is poetry. You may not like that. Anyway, tell me what you've been reading recently, and I'll see you next time.